Night in Thebes does not arrive gently. It falls like a closing stone door, leaving only the torchlight and the river's black gleam to mark where the world still moves. The year is deep in the reign of a new kingdom pharaoh, and the season of Akhet has swollen the Nile until the water presses right up against the temple embankments of Amun. The streets of the city quiet, traders roll up their mats, families bank their hearths, but inside the temple complex, the night is just beginning. You stand in the shadow of Karnak's colossal pylons, staring up at painted flags that hardly move in the heavy air, and you can feel it. This place owns the dark. Its sandstone towers carry prayers and threats in the same carved lines, and the god they house, at least on the walls, accepts only what is pure. That is what everyone in Thebes says. That is what every father is told when he hands over his daughter and pretends not to see the way she shakes as the temple guards lead her out of the public court and into the narrowing stone throat of the inner halls. Inside, the temperature drops. The last of the day's heat clings to the upper stones, but down here the air is cool, smelling of burned incense, old smoke trapped in the hieroglyphs, and the faint sour reek of canal water that seeps under doors never opened to commoners. Oil lamps bob in the hands of linen-clad priests, their shaved skulls gleaming, their bodies smelling of perfumed oil and the chalky natron they bathed in before sunset. Along one wall stand a line of girls, barefoot on the polished stone floor, heads newly shaved, linen dresses stiff with starch. They do not look at one another. They look at the door across from them, a tall wooden barrier banded in bronze, carved with images of a moon in perfect ordered rituals that look nothing like the chaos each girl imagines on the other side. At the center, a man in more elaborate linen, gold jewelry catching the lamplight, holds a heavy key in his hand. His name is Panesi, high priest of Amun, and in this place his word is as absolute as the pharaoh's. His fingers hover a heartbeat too long over the lock, as if he feels the weight of the moment, and then the key slides in, the bolt grinds, and a truth no one outside these walls will ever admit to is allowed, once again, to wake up. To understand what is about to happen to these girls, you have to go back, not away from the temple, but deeper into it, back to the day one of them first stepped through the outer gate, believing the word sacred meant safety. Her name, at the time, is Amun. She is 14, from a village upriver where the river floods the fields in regular comforting rhythm and the god lives in small mud brick shrines, not in stone cities that blot out the sky. The morning she arrives at Karnak, the sun is still low enough that the first pylon throws a long, cool shadow over the forecourt. The stone is dusty under her feet, grit working its way between toes that are used to soft soil. Her father walks beside her, jaw clenched, clutching a small woven basket that holds the last of their copper pieces and a ring her mother once wore. Ahead, the gate guards in their short kilts and leather straps barely look at him. A scribe sits nearby with a wooden pallet and reed pens, tallying offerings, muttering names and numbers as though people are just cargo. Her father has been told this is an honor. His daughter will serve the god, sing in the holy courts, receive bread and beer and linen all her life. In return, the temple will ease the grain tax that has been strangling their farm. Each time he tells himself this, it feels less like truth and more like a spell he is trying to cast on his own conscience. At the registration table stands Thutmose, a mid-ranking temple scribe with ink-stained fingers and a well-practiced blank expression. He does not see individuals. He sees categories: singer, weaver, water carrier. Amun steps forward when her father nudges her. The scribe asks her age, notes it down. He writes her village, misspells the name, and does not bother to correct it. He lists her under a column of newly dedicated girls, and beside her entry notes the remission of tax and the small copper payment to her family. The scratching of his pen on the ostraca feels louder to her than the bustle of the entire forecourt. With that sound, a transaction finishes. She does not yet know that in the eyes of this institution, it is not just her voice that has been purchased. It is everything. She is led away almost immediately. There is no long farewell. Her father is not allowed past the outer court, and when he tries to follow, a guard blocks him with a spear haft and a warning look. Amun turns the way she is told to turn, down a colonnaded corridor where the air suddenly smells different, less like animals and people, more like burned resin and cold water. Her sandals slap on the stone until another woman, older and severe, gestures and the sandals are removed, taken away. Barefoot now, she feels every tiny imperfection in the floor, every faint dip and groove polished by generations of feet that walked this path and never walked back out. The woman's name is Henut, and she introduces herself with a voice that makes everything sound like instruction, even when she says, "You will be among sisters here." The first place Amun is brought is not a shrine, but a bathing chamber open to the night sky, where a rectangular basin gleams with still, dark water. The surface reflects a square of stars and the faint smear of the Milky Way. But as she comes closer, the illusion of the heavens breaks. She sees the pale crystals floating in the water, smells the sharp mineral sting. Natron. It clings to her nose and tongue even before it touches her skin. Older women, also shaved bald, step forward with practiced movements. They strip her down without ceremony. The air is cool on her bare skin, goosebumps prickling along her arms. Hands, many hands, some gentle, some not, push her into the basin. The water is shockingly cold, the natron crystals scraping like fine sand as they rub her arms, her legs, even the soft skin under her arms, the down at the back of her neck. Her eyes sting. She squeezes them shut, tastes salt and mineral when she opens her mouth to gasp. The god accepts only what is clean, one woman murmurs. We remove everything that does not belong to him. They shave what little hair the village barber left, scraping the blade against her scalp until it feels raw and alien, as if her own head has become someone else's. They shave her body too, removing the last traces of adolescence that had made her feel older back home. Here, being older does not mean being more free. It means being more useful. When they finally lift her from the water, her teeth are chattering, and her bare feet leave wet prints on the stone that evaporate quickly in the dry air, as if her presence is already being erased. A fresh linen dress, pure white, is dropped over her head. It feels stiff and unfamiliar, scratching at her skin, smelling faintly of the reed mats it was dried on and of the smoke from the dye house. She reaches instinctively for her old dress, for the little amulet her mother hung around her neck years ago. They are gone. Henut Mahit looks at her with a kind of pity that is careful not to contradict doctrine. The god provides everything you need now, she says. You belong to his household. When the last of the purification is done, the older women lead Mariamun into the women's quarters. The shift in space is immediate. The ceilings are lower here, the corridors narrower, the air warmer and carrying different smells. Sweat, simple porridge, a hint of menstrual blood not quite masked by incense placed in the corners. Reed mats line the floor of a long room where dozens of sleeping niches have been carved into the walls, each one big enough for a single body and a folded linen cloth. There are no personal objects, no little clay figurines like the ones on shelves in village homes. The only images are of gods and goddesses painted in idealized forms, eternally young, eternally clean, eternally obedient to the cosmic order. The other girls glance up when Mariamun enters, their eyes giving away their curiosity before training has time to force them down. Heads shaved smooth, bodies as identically wrapped as mummy cases. They could be copies of one another, but they are not. The room counts them. The ledger somewhere in a side room counts them. The individuals inside their own skulls matter less. Her first night, Mariamun lies awake on her thin mat, feeling every uneven reed through the cloth, listening to the small sounds that fill these walls. Someone quietly cries into her arm, muffling the sound so it does not carry. Someone mutters a hymn under her breath, using the familiar words as a lullaby. From beyond the women's quarters comes the distant echo of male voices chanting, a bass undercurrent to everything else. And now and then the steady beat of a drum that seems to pulse inside her chest. The smell of oil lamps, thick and slightly bitter, mixes with the warmth of bodies and the faint odor of the latrine pit they share. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow and full of stone corridors and doors that never open towards the light. By dawn, the routine has already caught her. A bell, a real one, bronze, struck with a wooden stick, rings sharply in the corridor. The sound is important. It marks time in a world where the sun and the river are no longer the only clocks. She and the others stumble to their feet, bare soles hitting the cool floor, shoulders bumping as they try to move quickly without disorder. Another cold wash, less violent than the first but no less invasive, and then inspections. Henut Mahet and another older woman move along the line, tugging at linen to check for stains, for signs of bleeding, for any mark that could be spun as impurity. A girl whose monthly blood has come unexpectedly is pulled out of the line and sent to a side room for seclusion. No one meets her eyes. Mariamun wonders if her own body might betray her like that one day, and what it will cost her. After washing comes work. In a long hall open to a shaded courtyard, groups of women sit at looms, fingers moving with mechanical precision. The rhythm of the warp and weft is hypnotic. The soft slap of threads, the occasional creak of wood. Others, like Mariamun, are gathered in a rehearsal chamber where the walls are painted with musicians, harpists, flautists, singers holding sistrums. Henut Mahet stands before them, back straight, reed rod in hand. Again, she says. And the girls raise their voices in a hymn that has been sung in this city for generations. The words speak of the god's mercy, of his protection, of the joy of serving in his house. Their voices blend, high and clear, echoing off the stone. The sound is beautiful. It is also compulsory. A girl who sours a note is tapped sharply on the wrist with the rod. A girl who forgets a line feels the rod against the back of her calf. When they are dismissed, their throats ache, but no one dares ask for rest. A servant of the god does not complain. Days blur. Meriamun learns to move like a carved figure on a tomb wall. Precise, controlled, eyes lowered in the presence of certain men. Panesi, the high priest, passes sometimes through the women's courtyard on his way to the inner shrine. The air changes when he appears. Conversations die mid-sentence. Henut-Mehet's expression, usually brisk, becomes carefully neutral. His linen is whiter than anyone else's, his jewelry heavier, his coal-lined eyes taking in every detail without seeming to move. To the outside world, he is the embodiment of piety. He bathes twice a day, he abstains from common food during festivals, he recites long litanies flawlessly. To the girls, his presence feels like a weight pressing on the back of their necks. They have been told that if he marks them with his attention, it is an honor. They have also seen what happens to those who attract that attention too often. More inspections, more private summonses, and sometimes quietly a suddenly empty sleeping niche. Everything shifts when the first major festival arrives. The days leading up to it are thick with preparation. Offerings are counted, altars scrubbed until the stone smells of wet sand and ash, banners mended and raised. The entire city anticipates the festival of drunkenness, a night when the god's anger is soothed with wine and song, when the boundaries between the divine and human supposedly soften. For the girls in the women's quarters, it means something more specific, more eyes on them. Henut-Mehet pushes their rehearsals harder, making them sing until their voices break, then coating their throats with honey water to keep them going. She personally checks their linen dresses, making sure each pleat is perfect, each sash tied just so. "You will be seen," she says. "You must be faultless. Faults are noticed." The night of the festival, the temple transforms. Torches flare along the walls, painting everything in orange and black. The air is thick with incense so heavy it feels like a fog you could choke on, layered over the sweet, fermented smell of beer and wine being poured in vast quantities. Drums pound, flutes wail, sistrums rattle in a relentless glitter of sound. Statues of the goddess are carried in procession, veiled and garlanded, their feet never touching the ground, while crowds of elites and trusted commoners press close to catch a glimpse. Meriamun stands with the other singers at the edge of a courtyard, heart hammering, feeling the heat of bodies even from where she is. Sweat trickles down her spine beneath her linen. The drumbeat thrums in her bones. When Henut-Mehet signals, the girls begin their hymn, voices rising above the roar like a bright thread of sound, weaving through the chaos. As they sing, Panesi and the other senior priests appear from the inner halls. They are dressed not as men, but as gods. Elaborate headdresses, gold collars, patterned kilts, divine masks that cover their faces. The lamplight glints on polished metal. The crowd roars approval. In this intoxicated atmosphere, their words are taken as oracles, their movements as the god moving among his people. When Panesi lifts his arms, the courtyard quiets. Even from a distance, Meriamun can see the way his hands tremble slightly, whether from age or wine, she cannot tell. Amun hears you, he intones, voice thickened by the mask. Amun chooses those whose voices please him. The festival is supposed to be joyous. For a moment, Meriamun almost feels it. The music, the flickering lights, the sensation that she is part of something vast and ancient. A tradition older than any of them. But then priests begin to move along their line, selecting. A hand on a shoulder here, a nod there. Each chosen girl is pulled gently but firmly out of formation and lined up separately. The explanation is given. Special blessing, closer service, the gods delight in them. Henut-Mehet's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly each time a girl is taken. When the hand comes down on Meriamun's shoulder, the linen there is already damp with sweat. She flinches. The priest's fingers tighten, conveying that flinching is noticed, not forgiven. You might hope, standing with her in that moment, that closer service means more singing, perhaps tending sacred objects, pouring libations deeper within the sanctuary. That is the hope the stories outside the temple encourage. Daughters serving the god, safe behind holy walls. But as the selected girls are led away from the main courtyard, the sounds change. The music here is muffled, distant. The odors shift, less incense, more stale oil, the coppery hint of blood not quite washed from stone. The torches burn lower in these corridors, shadows thickening into shapes that make the hair on the back of Meriamun's neck rise. The line stops before a set of doors carved with scenes of perfect, stylized ritual. Priests presenting offerings, God seated in glory. No scene shows what actually waits beyond. The hand on her shoulder pushes forward gently, insistently, and somewhere behind his mask, Panesi smiles, secure in the knowledge that whatever happens next will never be carved in stone, never written in a hymn, never spoken aloud beyond these walls. The doors of the inner chamber close with a sound that feels too loud for the size of the room. The festival noise drops away like someone has cut a rope. In here, the air is heavier, almost still, scented with a concentrated mix of incense and human breath that has nowhere to go. The walls are close, covered in painted images of Amun receiving offerings from perfect priests and perfect supplicants, their bodies forever frozen in poses of reverence. None of those painted women look afraid. The real girls do. Mariamun's hands hang at her sides, fingers curling and uncurling against the linen of her dress. The floor under her bare feet is cool and very smooth, worn down by centuries of careful ritual steps. Tonight, the steps that brought her here were not careful. They were pushed. Panesi removes his golden mask slowly, as though performing a small miracle just for the intimacy of this smaller circle. Without the mask, his face is lined, his eyes bloodshot from wine, but his expression carries the same certainty that has always made others bow. Around him stand other priests, some younger, some older, all draped in linen that has been scented and blessed and handled as if it were itself holy. They speak softly to one another in tones that sound, to anyone outside the room, like the murmur of ritual preparation. They are not speaking about the god. They are speaking about the girls. Mariamun hears herself described without being addressed as a good voice, as obedient, as young enough. It is like being a jar of oil or a cut of meat. Useful. Consumable. Words are important in this world. Oaths, formulas, hymns. Spoken language is supposed to bind gods and humans together. Panesi uses that power now, like a shield and a weapon. You are honored, he tells the girls, voice slow, coaxing. Amun hears you more clearly than others. Tonight, he joins himself to those he has chosen, through us. There it is, the move that erases the boundary between his body and the gods. Through us. If he touches them, it is the god. If he commands, it is the god. If they hesitate, they are disobeying the god. Every lesson they have been taught since the day they walked through the temple gate has been designed to make that logic feel unbreakable. Fear does not care about theology. It arrives in the body first. Mariamun feels it as a buzzing in her limbs, a tightening in her throat that makes it suddenly hard to breathe. Her sight sharpens in small, unhelpful ways, the way a drop of lamp oil has hardened on the lip of a bronze stand, the pattern of a crack running through a painted lotus on the wall, the faint scar beneath Panesi's left ear where a blade or a fall once caught him. These details brand themselves into her memory as if her mind already knows no inscription will ever record this night honestly. The other girls stand stiff beside her. One is quietly sobbing, shoulders shaking. A priest lays a hand on that girl's shoulder and tells her that tears are a form of impurity in the god's presence. The girl struggles to stop. The tears do not care, either. What happens next? The temple will dress in the language of inspection, union, blessing. The reality is simpler, uglier. The girls are separated, taken aside one by one under the pretense that the god must have them presented individually. There are no witnesses whose testimony will count against a man like Panesi if he ever needed defending. The older women of the household are not invited. Mariamun hears, through the thick stone walls, muffled sounds. Protesting voices cut off, bodies shifting against the floor. A sharp, pained exhale someone tries to turn into a prayer. By the time it is her turn, she has already learned something no hymn ever taught her. That the elegance of a ritual can hide a great deal of cruelty, as long as the cruelty serves an institution that no one outside dares question. When Panesi's hands touch her, they are not gentle, but they are not clumsy. They are used to this. That familiarity is its own horror. He tells her not to flinch, that the god is moving through him, that her pain is part of an offering. There is no softness in his eyes, only an expectation that she will agree with him because he has always been agreed with. The stone at her back is cold and unyielding. The smell in the chamber is suddenly all wrong. Too much sweat under the incense. The metallic tang of blood rising before she feels it, the faint odor of old wine on his breath. She stares at the painted figure of Amun on the wall beyond his shoulder and tries to imagine that the god is looking at Panesi the way she is. The god, in paint, continues to smile serenely. Outside, the drums pick up again. To the worshippers in the bigger court, this is a sign that the god is pleased, that the climax of the festival is unfolding as it should. By dawn, songs will be composed and sung about Amun's joy, about the blessings he poured out on his city. No song will mention how many girls bled in small stone chambers that night. When Meriamun is finally released back to the women's quarters, the sky above the temple is beginning to pale toward gray, the first birds calling along the river. She walks stiffly, every step sending a spear of pain up through her abdomen. Her linen is changed as soon as she enters the quarters. The old dress with its stains is taken away in a basket and carried off toward the wash area or the ovens where ritual refuse is burned. The temple is efficient at removing evidence. Hanut Mahit is waiting. Officially, she says nothing out of line. She asks the girls if they performed well, if they remembered the hymns, if they kept their eyes lowered before the god. But when she sees Meriamun's face, something in her own expression cracks. Later, when the others are occupied with chores, she pulls Meriamun into a storage niche stacked with jars. The air smells of grain and old clay. "You must let your mind float away when they do that," she whispers, voice so low it barely stirs the dust. "You leave your body here and you go somewhere else, somewhere the god is not a man in a mask." It is a coping strategy disguised as spiritual advice. It is also the closest thing to rebellion she dares. Meriamun nods, but inside a different kind of voice has started speaking. If the god needs people to leave their bodies to survive his touch, what kind of god is he? The days after the festival are quieter on the surface. Offerings return to normal. The temple's outer courts go back to the steady rhythm of daily sacrifice, petitioners, and judgments. For the women, another kind of rhythm begins. The rhythm of scrutiny. Rumors spread silently through the quarters, not in words, but in glances. This girl had to see the healer for bleeding that would not stop. That one walks more stiffly than before. Another disappears from her mat entirely, and when someone asks, Henutmehet only says, "She is being purified." It is a phrase that now makes Meriamun's stomach twist. Several days later, she hears, through an open window high in a corridor, the cry of a jackal out beyond the city. The sound carries across sand and stone. In this culture, jackals are associated with Anubis, the god of embalming. The girls in the quarters hear that cry and think not of orderly tombs, but of bodies left where the desert animals can reach them. Inspections increase. In a side room whose walls are bare of decoration, the girls are told to strip again, to stand while priests check them for signs of moral failing. The pretext is that any mark, any bruise, any difference in their bodies could offend the god. In reality, it is another way to remind them who holds power over every inch of their flesh. Meriamun stands in that line, the air prickling against her naked skin, the lamps making sweat gleam along her spine. When the priest's hands reach her, they are cool from washing in natron, gliding with practiced detachment. They do not feel like medicine, they feel like ownership. If a girl flinches too much, she is reprimanded for bringing shame into the room. If a girl bears marks that cannot be explained away, she is marked in the ledger as suspect. No space on that clay shard will say hurt by a priest. The shorthand will read impure or unsuitable for service. In another building at the edge of the complex, Thutmose sits hunched over his work. The room is lit by a skylight and two lamps that throw long shadows over his hands. The smell here is ink and papyrus, dust, and the faint oil used to soften reed pens. Before him lie several ostraca covered in cramped writing, lines of names and numbers marching across the curved surfaces. He records how much grain each temple worker is entitled to, how much beer, how many loaves. His job is to make sure no one takes more than the god allows. Lately, he has been writing the same small notations beside more than a few women's names. Removed for impurity, dedicated to the desert, no longer in service. The words sit uneasily on the page. He has not been told why these changes are happening more often. He has heard rumors, scraps of conversation, the way the washerwomen talk a little too loudly when priests pass by, as if covering something. He is a man of the system. It has fed him all his life. But he is also a man with enough imagination to sense that the gaps in his accounts are not accidents. On one shard, almost without thinking, he draws a tiny mark next to a girl's erased name, a simplified symbol used in some funerary texts to indicate a lament. It is nothing. It is not official. It is not meant to be read by anyone but himself. It is also a breach. For the first time, someone inside the machinery has allowed his pen to say, however obliquely, this is wrong. Over time, as more names vanish under similar euphemisms, Thutmose's margin marks multiply. An extra line here, a tiny variation in the way he writes a word there. No court of law would accept these as testimony. But centuries later, when archaeologists are brushing dirt from these very shards, those tiny deviations will be among the only hints that someone, once, had doubts. Back in the women's quarters, Meriamun's private doubts sharpen into something like anger the day she hears of a punishment that even Henut Mahit cannot soften. One of the younger girls, scarcely into adolescence, is accused of inviting impurity because a junior priest claims she tempted him with unclean thoughts. The idea that a child could do this to a grown man is absurd. In the language of the temple, it becomes truth. At dawn, under a pale, colorless sky, the girl is taken beyond the city walls with a small group of officials. She is told it is a purification retreat, that she will fast and pray in the desert and return clean. Mariamun does not see what happens in that strip of land between Nile and wasteland, but she knows the heat, knows how quickly the sun devours water from a body, how the sand burns feet, how the wind scours unprotected skin. When the officials return without the girl, they bring back nothing of hers. The entry in Thutmose' ledger will say, "Dedicated to the desert." The desert has many mouths and no reason to speak. It is after this that Mariamun does something small but different. During another rehearsal, when a junior priest moves down the line, adjusting girls' shoulders under the guise of correcting their posture, his hand lingers on the upper arm of a child who has barely arrived. The girl freezes. Hanutmehit, on the far side of the room, is turned away, dealing with a wrong note. For once, no one is watching closely. Mariamun takes a half-step sideways, placing herself between the priest and the girl, pretending to be confused about her mark on the floor. The movement disrupts the neat line. The priest's hand meets air. His eyes narrow. "Step back," he orders, irritation tight in his voice. Hanutmehit hears the change and turns. She sees Mariamun out of place and reacts the only way she can without drawing more dangerous attention. She strides over and cracks her reed rod lightly but firmly across Mariamun's calf. "You move when I tell you," she snaps, "not when your own thoughts pull you." Out loud, it is correction. In her eyes, for a brief flicker, there is something like approval. The punishment stings. The welts on Mariamun's leg will burn each time she walks for the rest of the day. But the feeling in her chest is not entirely pain. For the first time since she entered this place, she has chosen which body to protect, even if only for a second. It does not change the structure towering above her. It does not strip Panesi of his titles, does not erase the rituals that sanctify what he does. The god statue still sits in his hidden shrine, golden and impassive. The drums still mark the hours of service. The ledgers continue to reduce lives to lines. Yet the certainty that the temple's version of purity is righteous has cracked, at least in her. Behind the obedient bow of her head, a thought takes shape and stays. Being pure here has nothing to do with goodness. It has everything to do with obedience and usefulness to men who call their desires holy. Years pass. The sharp horror of individual nights blurs, but the system remains sharp. Mariamun grows older, her body changing in ways the temple notices. Young girls arrive from villages she has never seen, eyes wide the way hers once were. She becomes in turn one of the older women, teaching hymns, correcting posture, checking linen. Hanutmehit's hair, where it grows back between shavings, turns gray. Panesi stoops a little more when he walks, but his authority does not stoop with him. When the earth trembles one year and a side chapel statue cracks and falls, people whisper about omens. A small piece of the god's image lies on the floor, nose broken off. Mariamun watches as priests rush to cover the damage with cloths and chants. The god will be healed, the statue repaired, the crack plastered and repainted. There is a strange, bitter comfort in the sight. If even the image of a god can break, then the institutions that claim to speak for that god are not invincible. Eventually, disease or exhaustion takes Mariamun, as it takes most people in that age. She does not die in a blaze of rebellion. There is no uprising, no dramatic trial of priests. Her ending is quiet, a fever that does not break, a body that has been pushed too hard for too long, finally deciding to rest. Somewhere, Thutmose or another scribe like him records her as no longer in service, perhaps adding a small extra notch in the margin only he will ever understand. Her grave, if she has one, is modest, dug into earth that has held thousands of others, with maybe a few sherds and amulets to keep her company. The temple continues. The songs continue. New voices pick up the hymns where hers leave off. Centuries roll by. The Nile shifts its course. Dynasties rise and fall. Foreigners come and go. The once bright paint on the temple walls fades under sun and sand. Stone carvings are vandalized, repurposed, buried. The records, those fragile clay shards and papyrus scrolls, scatter. Some end up in rubbish pits, others in tombs, others sealed in storerooms that collapse. When they are dug up again in modern times, they are objects of curiosity. Scholars read the names, the rations, the titles. They reconstruct the economic might of the temples, the structure of priestly families, the roles of female singers and weavers. They see the words dedicated to the desert, removed for impurity, no longer in service, and they know, from context, that those phrases are not praises. They are euphemisms for something gone wrong, something the official story did not care to detail. Modern textbooks about ancient Egypt often focus on the dazzling parts. The gold masks, the massive obelisks, the orderly funerary texts, the serene statues of gods and pharaohs. They mention priestly purity rules, elaborate festivals, the special role of temple women as musicians of the gods. They do not usually dwell on what could happen when absolute power over pure bodies met human desire and fear. That gap is where stories like Mariamun's live, not as proven, documented biographies, but as the most honest way to read between lines written by institutions that were invested in their own perfection. The horror is not in some exotic stereotype of temple prostitution. The horror is that an entire system could call itself holy while turning real girls into unrecorded sacrifices on the altar of its reputation. And that is why episodes like this matter to a channel like Epoch Ensemble. Because when you walk through the ruins of Karnak today, in the glare of tourist cameras and midday sun, you see the towering columns, the carved gods, the inscriptions bragging about how many enemies were crushed and how many offerings were given. You do not see the girls' sleeping niches. You do not smell the natron on their skin. You cannot hear the drum at midnight or the sobs that stone swallowed. But the ledgers, the broken shards, the sudden disappearances in the records, they are still there if you look. They whisper that the most respectable institutions in history were also capable of the most carefully hidden cruelty, especially when it came wrapped in the word purity. If this journey into the hidden chambers of Amun's temple unsettled you, it is doing exactly what it should. These are the kinds of lives Epoch Ensemble exists to trace. People swallowed by systems whose fear and small acts of resistance never made it into the monuments. Tell in the comments what struck you most. The way a father could sign his daughter away for a tax remission, the way a priest could use a mask to turn his desire into a god's command, or the way a single doubtful scribe might be the only reason we sensed something was wrong at all. Whose story do you want to open next? The forgotten wives sealed in royal tombs, children buried under imperial palaces, or the patients locked behind monastery infirmary doors? If you want more of these buried histories brought back into the light, where the stone rhetoric cracks and real human voices begin to leak through, make sure you're subscribed to Epoch Ensemble and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. This channel lives on the friction between what the records say and what they refuse to say. Somewhere tonight, the ruins of Thebes are just cold stone under a modern sky. The doors of Amun's temple stand open to the wind now, not to priests. But if you listen closely, past the tourist chatter and the camera shutters, you can almost hear the echo of bare feet on stone, the scratch of a reed pen, and the voices of girls whose names were meant to vanish, still insisting on being heard.